gates, meaning anything that is related to your career, your jobs, your internships, fellowships, graduate school, pre-health, pre-law, essentially everything you do on and off of Barnard's campus during and after your time as a student here is relevant to the work Beyond Barnard does. So during this conversation, we're going to dive into how best to present yourself and prepare yourself for virtual presentations and interviews. So now I'm going to hand it over to AJ, who will be moderating our conversation.
Hi, good afternoon, everybody. I'm AJ Ehrenstein. I'm one of the two deans of Beyond Barnard. It's good to see your avatars, your little icons, your fake backgrounds. Lena, I see you. And your faces. This has been an experiment for all of us. We're 6 weeks into this remote programming and advising, but things have gone really well from our perspective so far. My job is to lead Beyond Barnard, and as Claire helpfully elucidated, we cover all things related to career development, campus jobs, fellowships, competitive and otherwise graduate and professional school admissions, and a lot of things in between. So thanks for joining us, and I'm going to hand it off to our experts. In the meantime, just a couple of suggestions for just before we kick things off. If you could put yourself on mute if you haven't, that would be helpful. I'm happy to take questions throughout the program. So I've given our panelists a couple of questions to start with, and we'll do about 20 to 25 minutes of the things that we said we were going to discuss beforehand. But in the meantime, if you want to chat directly to me, some of the questions that you have, I can feed them to our panelists, and we can make sure that we're weaving in what you're thinking about during the conversation. So what we aim to talk about tonight is some best practices, both in terms of the form and content of virtual interviews and presentations. It's so awesome to collaborate with our dear friends at the Speaking Fellows program. They're a fantastic resource on campus, and we hope that you'll end up wanting to use them as much as I would for sure if I were a student, and that you'll come see us at Beyond Barnard. So without further ado, I'm going to hand it off to our panelists to say a little bit about themselves and a little bit about how they work with students in the areas of preparation for virtual interviews and presentations. So I said I would start it with Kat. So Kat, take it away.
Hi everyone, I'm Kat Bartley. I'm a senior at Barnard studying political science and ancient studies. I am a peer career advisor, which means that I work in one-on-one settings with students, and we help students with resumes, cover letters, interview prep, job search prep, really anything that you need help with in terms of career development. So we're available right now to have virtual appointments with students, so feel free to schedule an appointment via Handshake. So I've been helping students with virtual interviews for the past few weeks when they come up for internships, for jobs. And I think one of the big hesitations that students have that make them nervous about virtual interviews is like this feeling that it's unnatural and that there's a lot of interruptions, there's a lot of like difficulty figuring out how to navigate kind of the social situation of being in a virtual interview. And I think my key piece of advice is just to treat it like any old discussion that you would have in person, to recognize that they are just as aware as you are about how strange virtual communication can be, and just to be comfortable with silence, because you want to try to avoid the interruption, but it's okay if it happens, and just be comfortable with the delay, the lag, and just kind of let the conversation flow as needed.
Awesome, thanks, Kat. So let's alternate PCA and Speaking Fellow. So let's go with Daniela.
Hi, my name is Daniela LeBron. I'm a sophomore at Barnard studying political science and American studies. I'm a Speaking Fellow. I use she, her pronouns. And similar, I guess, to the PCAs, we work with students one-on-one, but also in group settings for classes or just for other things. Like we can do interviews, but I mean, we're not exactly the experts on that. But yeah, on some other things to prepare for presentations, speeches for class, all sorts of things. We kind of meet you where you're at in terms of what you want to do. And yeah. Oh, something that I've been working on with a lot of people is in terms of presentations, like we've been taught maybe to have certain body language and things like that, and going on Zoom, it's a very different atmosphere. And so I think something that's important is just remembering to pace yourself and maybe use your cursor to point at things if you have a PowerPoint presentation, being that is Zoom, that's common now. So share your screen. And then thinking about sharing your screen, making sure when you do share your screen, nothing else is there, because that's the last thing you want. But yeah.
I've seen a few of my favorite things to check boxes for on shared screen snafus is this happens with faculty. I love faculty. I love working with faculty. They've shared their screens with me a couple of times in the past few weeks, and you can see their browsers and there's like 700 tabs open. It's like, guys, I'm really concerned about the bandwidth of your internet connection and also the well-being of your hard drive. That's one of my favorites. Maya, go ahead.
Hey everyone, I'm Maya. I am a peer career advisor like Kat. I'm studying dance and architecture. I think one of the big things that I've been thinking about in terms of virtual communication in general over Zoom, but especially for interviews, because there's this added layer of stress, is to realize that virtual interaction is really draining. And it's more draining than interaction. And so give time, especially before, but also after, to not schedule yourself too heavily around an interview, and to really take time to prepare for that, is just going to give you better results.
That's a great point. We'll talk a little bit more about the particular ways in which these conversations can be surprisingly draining for reasons that are different from in-person interactions. But Hawa, can you take us home with introduction and first points?
Yes, for sure. All right, I'm having a little bit of internet issues, but my name is Hawa. I'm a junior here at Barnard, and I'm also a speaking fellow similar to Daniela. And my time has been spent these past few weeks just working with students that I'm attached to, in just terms of how do you present on Zoom? What does that look like, especially with a class like Reacting to the Past, where everything is like body language and you're giving speeches and character? How do you do that and still maintain agency and choice in how you want to present your presentation just through a box? And how do you keep people engaged in those speeches? So it's been really cool, really interesting process for sure.
Great, and I actually want to call out something that Hawa did there that I think is one of our first best practices that we can call out, which is to say when you're having technical issues, rather than try to ignore it and hope that the other people on the line don't think something wrong is happening, you should just call it out and say, hey, listen, I just wanted to say I'm going to put in the chat, I have a phone right here, and you should keep a phone nearby just in case you need to move to telephone, which is always more reliable. And just say, listen, we're in this shared technological space. Everybody's internet breaks sometime. I was having trouble just now getting into the audio when I signed on. But Hawa calling out, hey, I just want to give you a heads up. I'm having some technical difficulties, might have to move media. That's the best way. Run at the awkwardness and call out the fact that we're in this shared awkward space, which is a point that Kat brought up as well. So I want to kind of start just by asking our four speakers to reflect on some of the key differences between in-person and virtual communication when it comes to these very specific contexts of interviews and presentations. What would you say are some of the things that stand out to you as significantly different between these two media? And we can start to unpack how to address those differences. Anyone can start if you guys want to take yourself off mute.
I'll start. I think that there are a lot of differences between virtual and in-person interviews, one of which is just your ability to read social cues and feel like connected to the people who are interviewing with you. And I think that it can be difficult to figure out when they're going to start talking, when they're going to stop talking, what they're thinking, how they're responding to what you're saying, what their body language is, and also how do you convey your own body language and your own emotions when you're on a virtual setting. And I think the best thing to do is not overthink it, and just kind of act naturally and act like you would in an in-person setting, while also, again, like I said earlier, just be comfortable with silence, be comfortable with any sort of awkward things that come up. That's totally fine. And they're, also aware that this is a strange situation for you to be in. But that being said, there are also some pros to having a virtual interview, which is that you can be a bit more comfortable. You can be in your home. You don't have to, have a long commute that kind of gets your nerves going before you get there. You can have kind of a cheat sheet of notes beside you if that's something that you think would help you. And like AJ said, you can have your phone nearby. If you have technological difficulties, you can have, some water, whatever makes you comfortable nearby. So you can have a bit more agency in that scenario, which is something to kind of have as a silver lining and to keep in mind.
Great, and I love starting with the positives. We're so used to thinking about these things as particularly stressful, but to think about some of the ways that being in your own home space can make certain kinds of interview and presentation conversations feel a little bit more comfortable because you're in your space. You've got your furniture around you, your books. It can be kind of empowering in a surprising way. What else?
Similar to that, like concept of curating your space, the same kind of goes for presentations. Like it is very different and reliant on like picking up on social cues, as you mentioned, and just seeing others' expressions. Sometimes people don't have their camera on for whatever reason. And I think it's very helpful that you are able to curate your space, one, that you're comfortable in your like own home or just whatever space you're using, but also like your presentation, like you can make it more user-friendly in a sense, more simple, in the sense that like, because it's not in person anymore, you have different priorities. So that's kind of nice. And then also, like you mentioned, the little cheat sheet that you can have, that's always a plus. But yeah, it's very different. I know personally I get like headaches from staring at the blue light or, yeah, so lots of differences, but there are definitely some pros slowly weaving in there, but yeah.
Daniela and Kat both mentioned the cheat sheets. And actually one of the things that I often recommend is since eye contact is at the green dot, so you all should be, you should be right now perceiving me to be making eye contact with you when I'm just staring at the camera, as it were. But if you stick cheat sheets on the wall behind your computer or just above, you can essentially create a little impromptu teleprompter. Your notes can be immediately behind the camera. I'm looking at the wall behind my computer right now, but I'm still also looking directly at the camera. Or sometimes Post-it notes that are just to the left and to the right of where the camera is can be helpful to read off of. You don't want to overdo that. You don't want to have too much, but definitely part of making yourself feel more comfortable can be having notes in front of you. Maya, Hala, other things that you've identified as significantly different from between personal and virtual environments?
I think the cheat sheet is a nice one because I think it highlights the fact that virtual intervention can take a little more preparation. I think the interviews are require a lot of improvisation. And when you can't read the other person, it'll make you feel more comfortable if you have prepared a little bit more than your average interview. So like that may mean writing out an actual answer to a question instead of just thinking, oh, I'll talk about these 3 points. And then, yeah, having not necessarily a script, but having something written out or taking that time to prepare can alleviate some of the weirdness.
Great, so over preparation, and we'll kind of double back to the questions of how can you specifically prepare. How, is there anything else that you wanted to add, and maybe stick with you about preparation to start there?
Yeah, for sure. I think it's like more of like a fun tip kind of thing. Like when it comes to virtual interviews, a lot of the times you only have to be dressed from the top up. It's kind of my approach, and that factors into the being comfortable in your space. Like you literally could be very comfortable in your space and just have the top up. Like I speak for myself, like making sure that presentation value and still dressing up as if you're giving the interview is so important, I guess, for like psychological reasons, but just being prepared and feeling prepared, dressed prepared as well, because it's something that translates both virtually and when you're in person. So it's kind of just a matter of feeling the part and doing the part. I think that's part of it.
Yeah, I think that's a fantastic point, Hawa, is that the kind of practice the way you play. So what I recommend when it comes to preparation, and Maya, I think this goes to your point about over preparing, is to actually dress the way you would for the interview and do a practice round with a speaking fellow or with a PCA in the conditions that you're going to reproduce when it comes time to give that presentation or do the interview. It helps you kind of work out the technical bugs. It helps you remember things like your charger. Like I just realized, holy crap, I'm at 10% right now. I'm going to definitely have to get up in the middle of this conversation and get my charger. But if you practice and you realize that it's something that you can avoid. So practice inhabiting the person you're going to be when you're actually on one of these calls, and dressing the part, dressing the way you're going to dress when you're on the interview or presentation can be one of those things. Maybe we could stay there. What are some other specific tips that you might have with respect to this question of how to prepare? What does over preparing mean? Or, how do you avoid over scripting yourself while still recognizing that communicating in a virtual medium can take a little bit more time to prepare?
I think in terms of the content of what you're preparing for your interviews, you want to stick to kind of the same sample questions that you would prepare for an in-person interview. You want to, look at the sample questions that Beyond Barnard offers. If you need those, I can send them to you. But basically, prepare the same way you would for an in-person interview. I think one of the tricky things is finding a nice balance between having like a script right in front of you versus having some notes. And you need to figure out what works best for you. So that's a great way to, a good thing to work out when you're practicing. Sometimes it's easier for you just to have like a few ideas jotted down on a Post-it and that's it, so that you're not like reading straight from a script, which can feel kind of unnatural and might not flow necessarily with the questions that they're actually asking you. But for some people, having specific, like perhaps their thesis statement, their like main pitch, they want to write that all out and have it at the top of their screen. Whatever works for you in a way that isn't too obvious and isn't too like forced and unnatural, you can figure that out on your own. But I think having that flexibility to do what works best for you is a really nice thing about virtual interviews. And then, I think that's what I had to say for now, but I'll let you know if I think of anything else.
Anybody else want to weigh in here on preparation?
Yeah,
think-
for sure. Oh, go ahead.
Daniela, you go. It's fine.
Okay. I think echoing a lot of what Kat said, like it's a matter of you and knowing yourself, and that's why I think we're Speaking Fellows and PCAs are a great tool, and I think a lot of students have benefited from like working with maybe sharing their screen and seeing like, does this work for me? Or like the concept of seeing yourself on screen and like while presenting is strange, and that's not usually something we do when we're like in person. So I think practicing is really a good way to like find your balance of both like how much you want prepared like on the side, but also like for your virtual setting, how you want it to be, what you find works best for yourself.
I thought I'd add here, and then Maya, I know you were going to add as well. Think about your preparation through the lens of the technology. So what happens when you're in a virtual space is that you tend to go longer than you would otherwise, because you don't get some of the cues that Kat was talking about at the top of this conversation. So you tend to go longer. Sometimes people over talk because they think they have to get into the microphone. I think the bigger error is to under talk, is to not speak loudly enough. So make sure to practice and use the practice as an opportunity to test your own levels. And I think that you should try to figure out how to weave in checking in with the audience more often, at least in an interview space. So saying things like, I'm going to stop there because I think I've answered the question, but let me know if you'd like me to keep going. So that's a good way to artificially integrate check-ins to essentially be a proxy for those cues that you would otherwise be able to pick up on in person. So integrating some of that into your preparation can be helpful. Maya, you were going to say something as well.
Yeah, I think I love that tip, actually. I'm going to start using that. Something that I was thinking about in order to avoid actually scripting your answers, and this is something that I've done with my friends, is like doing kind of a test interview, or less of a mock interview and more of a tell me about this job, or like tell me about why you're qualified for this, or why you're interested in it. Because also, like, we're all isolated from our friends. Like, get in touch with your friends, see what they're up to, and you know, maybe you can help each other prepare.
Howie, did you want to add as well?
Alrighty. I was in and out. My wife always like keeping me in and out of the Zoom, but
We're glad you're here.
yeah, I'm glad I'm here. But I mean, to echo any of all the points that have been made, I feel like practicing beforehand, before you have the meetings and things like that, that'd be great. Also, I feel like when it comes to like the talk, speaking up or speaking low, that's like practicing with someone else. That would be able to tell you like, can you actually hear me? Like, if I talk like this, am I talking too loud? Or if I talk like this, am I talking too low? And having someone to like bounce the idea off of before.
For sure. And I think some of that also relates to setup, which I want to talk about as well. So I'll just give you a sense of, I'm going to actually share my screen for a moment, and I'm not sure. So we'll both, I'll share my screen now, and we can share this virtually after the event. But we have a couple of pretty specific ideas about how a setup can be used to your advantage at Beyond Barnard. So can everybody see my 10 tips for acing virtual interviews at this point? A couple of things that I'm actually trying to model in the way that I'm set up right now is my camera is above me and looking down. So if you think about selfie best practices, you never take a selfie with your friends from down below. And yet many of us will do virtual interviews like on top of our computers. So thinking about flattering angles, the light in my room right now is coming through the window at me instead of being backlit. And so you can actually rig that in a little mini movie set type of way by stationing a little lamp or light in front of you. I think that keeping your phone on silent, if you're like me and your mom is always asking you how your interview is going, believe me, she will decide to call you during the interview to check on how things are going. So keep your technology away. And also, especially for those of you who are not used to being home around your pets or small siblings or cousins, try to keep all human and tiny humans and animals in separate rooms for interviews. If you can help it, if you can find that space. And if not, I think you should, again, run at the awkward, say, you know, hey, I just want to let you know, we have a couple of little ones in the house and they may be running back and forth. Believe me, most of the people that you're dealing with in these virtual spaces right now, many of whom are parents, will commiserate and will absolutely understand what the situation is. So it's fine to call it out. But in terms of like setups, do you all have some specific tips about creating spaces, like actual, you know, kind of spaces on the screen that can be helpful in the virtual interview space?
I think
Go ahead, Maya.
I think something that not necessarily related to the background, but in terms of your physicality, making sure you have a setup where you can shift around physically is so important. This is a mistake that I've made before when I was doing Skype interviews in my dorm room at Barnard, like on top of my bed, trying to sit up straight and not wiggle around for 45 minutes is not what the human body is meant to do. So figure out a space that's ergonomic because it's just gonna do wonders for you and for your spine.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. For people who are gestural talkers as well, it can be important to back away so that you're actually showing the audience that you're using your hands to talk. So again, if you're like my family, you're basically mute. If my hands were tied behind my back, I wouldn't be able to say anything. But it also is a little bit more natural to be able to sit away from the camera and give your audience a little bit of your audience or your interviewer the clarity that you're kind of reaching for a word. It can make it easier for you to communicate if you have access to gesture. What else? What are some other ideas? Maya, I think that's great. Although you're a dancer, you know, sitting up straight all the time should be like natural to you. No, I'm just kidding. What else?
I'd like to add on. I think for presentations more specifically, I feel like my whole take on it, like I actually appreciate the post-it note idea, but let's say you have your notes on like a doc and you have everything in bullet points. What I have is like my camera is like right in the center, but this is a desktop setting, hence why you see people walking around in the background, all the fun stuff that happens in the household. But split screen. So like half the screen will be like my notes that I have that are bullet pointed. Half the screen will be, you know, the people that I can see, and then the camera itself, so that you're not staring into people's souls the entire time. Because when you're even talking to people, you tend to move your eyes around. You tend to just, you know, wave your attention ever so slightly. But just having those 3 points of connection also make you look like you're organically giving a conversation that isn't staring into the person's souls the entire time. That's just my take.
That's great. Kat?
I think in terms of, I mean, I agree with what everyone said in terms of just like posture and feeling like you're able to sit in a comfortable position. I think if you're able to sit in like a chair by a table or a desk where you can put your feet flat on the ground, that's always a good thing for just like keeping a good posture the whole time. So I would say, sorry, my little animal is currently causing a ruckus. It's fine. So yeah, making sure that you can, you know, find a place where you're comfortable and you can sit and feel professional, kind of like you would in an in-person setting. And having a blank background is also helpful, just to both for yourself and for the interviewer, just to kind of have distractions out of the way and feel like, you know, you're presenting your face and yourself above anything else, and you're not feeling like it's necessarily an invasion of your privacy. You know, you don't necessarily want to have your bedroom wall or your bed behind you if that feels uncomfortable for you. So, you know, finding a place where your background, you're comfortable with it, is also important.
Yeah, I think, Kat, I think that's a great point. I think there are differing schools of thought. I tend to say something that's behind you that's interesting but not distracting can be okay. The white wall can sometimes produce an amount of light. If you're against a white wall, it can actually end up inadvertently backlighting you. There can be shadows behind. So just play with the background. A plain background can be fine. But I would definitely say no matter what, keep in mind that your background will be visible. So if you have a bookshelf behind you and you have an idiot's guide to X, like right front and center, people will see that title. If you're in an unfamiliar environment, like I was on an admissions panel at my parents' house a couple of weeks ago, and 5 minutes before the presentation, I realized their books were behind me and their books are not my books. And I literally found something that I was like, oh my God, I cannot let the incoming class of 2024 and their parents see the titles behind me. So just be cognizant. I think, Kat, that's the broader point here too. Be cognizant of what your surroundings say about you when you're going into these kinds of professional settings. And Daniela, did you want to add as well?
Yeah, for sure. The background thing, that's something I think about all the time because I sit in my room and my sister's also in the room. And so like what I do is I'll like adjust the camera so that you can't see her like sitting in the background. And I think the nice thing about presentations, at least for classes, most of the time is that professors are understanding about the situation we're in. So like the background thing is less of an issue sometimes. You know, maybe it, you know, they get that you're in your room, you're at home, and so your childhood bedroom in the background is not the worst thing, which is nice. And something I do too for like the screen, like my room gets barely any light, which sucks. And so like I'll have another thing open that has like a lighter color to it because Zoom, it looks dark, and so that'll like illuminate my face because otherwise it's super dark and then you can't see me. And I think part of the interaction on Zoom is like seeing other people's facial expressions, especially because we can't always like make sounds or you can't see if I shift. So
yeah, I think that's such a great point. And I'm auditing a graduate seminar this semester. And the funny thing is that you can tell when people are paying attention to class as the light gets lower in the afternoon, you can tell who's got Zoom open and who's browsing by the brightness of their monitor. But the flip of that is exactly that you can use your monitor itself as a source of brightness and light if you need to do that. We did have a question come in that I think is a good one for this, and there's a specific type of nervousness that can attend to interviews and presentations. And I think that you all in the course of your work with students talk about different strategies for managing those nerves about self-presentation in person. Other than preparation, which we've talked a little bit about, what are some of the techniques that you can suggest to get rid of nerves maybe right before a virtual interview? What do you think you can do within the last, let's say, 5 to 10 minutes before something starts, a presentation or an interview?
I mean, this may be just the dancer in me, but I feel like if you do something physical right off the bat, I, especially since we're spending so much time indoors, like getting yourself to move around, like doing planks, horrible, but like it gets the job done. It gets the blood flowing out of, you know, your racing heart rate and into the rest of your body. And I think also taking pauses in the middle of the interview, like Kat was saying, being comfortable with silence, like just taking a breath somewhere can really just ground you.
I want to kind of go back to something Hawa said right at the top, which is, and when she was discussing it was as a positive, which is you're in your own space. You don't have to get on the subway to get to an interview. You can feel more comfortable. On the flip side of that, I find that when I have a virtual presentation or an interview, I am prepping right up to the very start of the thing, right? I am frantically getting notes together and preparing, because I know that in order to get there, all I have to do is turn on Zoom, right? And so what you end up robbing yourself of here, and Maya, this might be to your point a little bit, is a little bit of space for yourself to get away from the preparation for a second and center yourself and get the last minute or the last kind of shaking the cobwebs out. I think it's really important to insert artificial space for yourself, aesthetic space, some physical space if you want to take a walk around the block with a mask on, of course, before you do an interview or presentation, making sure that you are creating some artificial space between you and the camera, so that when you get there, you've done some reflective space, you've done some reflective time to get you ready for the conversation that's about to ensue. I think creating that space can be really important in terms of getting rid of last minute nerves. Kat, Daniela, did you want to address any of these? And just a reminder to everyone, please feel free to start sending questions via the chat. You can send them directly to me, or alternatively, if you feel comfortable sharing them in front of everybody, feel free to type it out to everyone. But Kat, Daniela, is there anything else you wanted to add there, or Hawa?
I mean, I think just going off of what everyone said, the nice thing about having a virtual interview or presentation is that you have the time and the space to literally do whatever you want before it. So, whatever calms your own nerves, whether that's like meditating, exercising, eating, drinking, like water, whatever it is, figure out what like helps you get centered and focused, but also allows you to relax a little bit before it starts. So if you're like a performer and you have rituals before your shows, things like that, I mean, you probably have a sense of what calms your nerves. So you get to do those things right before, right up until the moment that you start Zoom or whatever it is. So take advantage of that, because that's something you don't usually get in an in-person interview situation.
And I think for me, especially in my household, because I live with so many people and the computer that I use in the living room, because my laptop doesn't do well with like the camera and audio interfacing, talking to the people around you as well, saying, hey guys, I'm about to go on to this meeting. Please be aware. If I'm looking at you stringently, it's because you need to be quiet, as I usually do on camera. But taking that time to just talk to them, it works sometimes. I mean, 6-year-olds can only comprehend so much, but just if that's your situation and you're living with family members and there's like a bunch of you, also having those conversations beforehand, before you get into your reflective mode, just be like, hey guys, shush it, and then, carry on from there.
I think that's great. I think that's, it speaks to the reality of how basically we are all living right now. I did a talk for faculty with the Center for Engaged Pedagogy last week on interview and presentation best practices. And I shared a statistic that up until about a couple of years ago, only about 60% of organizations conducted some form of interviews or evaluation online. That number had risen to 75% as of last year. And right now, anyone who is recruiting is doing, I can see you laughing. Anyone who's doing any kind of recruiting is obviously doing it online. And so I think that we all have a shared sensibility and a shared awareness of the challenges and opportunities that attend to this kind of communication in a way that I think really can be a benefit to you all. Everyone knows what this is like now in a way that they didn't just a few weeks ago. I kind of want to shift gears a little bit and ask a couple of questions that I didn't put in advance. But I would say another thing that we've seen an uptick for, and this could be for the PCAs, but please, speaking fellows, if you have something to say here too, let me know. We've seen an uptick in recorded interviews, in questions that you'll get beforehand. And actually, Hawa, you might have done one of these for Moody, so I'd welcome your questions as well, or welcome your comments as well. How do you prepare for that? Because that's an especially weird thing, right? You get a set amount of time to record answers. It's a virtual interview, but it's even less. You don't even get the smiles and the nods from people in Zoom. Instead, you're just talking to the camera, just presenting to a camera. So what are some other things that we haven't talked about that might be important to know about for those kinds of challenges?
I think for those kinds of recorded interviews, I mean, it's helpful to, practice with a timer for all interviews really, but for those especially, it can be helpful to have a timer beside you when you're practicing, and really, practice your answers. Think about, what wording you would want to use, and then make sure that you're meeting the required time limits. It's, really nice that you get those questions ahead of time so that you really can prepare specifically for that interview and you're not really blindsided. And I mean, another, silver lining there is that you don't have to feel nervous about how the interviewer is going to react in the moment. You get to just kind of present yourself and know that you're putting your best foot forward and not stress too much about the reaction you're getting. So just be yourself and prepare really well and make sure that you're meeting those time limits.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. A lot of the challenge of these interviews is actually comporting with the rule of the genre. So if you break the rules, you're immediately out of contention. But we can kind of forget about those if we're so fixated on the answers themselves. We might just fly past the time limit, or say something we're not supposed to say. Anything else about these interviews that anyone wanted to add, either from personal experience or just from an advising and advice perspective?
Yeah, for sure. I feel like I had to do a few of them as well over the summer, because with finance, they make you, like, a lot of the companies because they get thousands and thousands of applications and resumes, they sift you through by first giving you a higher view and say, okay, here are the questions. But the thing about them is they don't give the questions before the interview. You kind of, they give the question and then you're prompted, you have like 30 seconds to think about the question and then you answer from there. But these are usually like qualitative questions or questions that you can kind of gauge by like saying Google, like, financial questions, interview questions. You'll find questions along the lines of that. So that's not always a problem. You see, this is an example of me telling them to shush and not working out in my favor. But yeah, I think for me, lighting was also very important. And when it comes to recording yourself, it's different from the methodology. I was like, look at the camera, look up over here. But it's kind of when you're recording yourself, you definitely want to be looking directly at the camera. Then it gives you the feel that you're actually looking at the person. So.
Yeah, I think that's especially the case when you're presenting or when you're in one of these higher view situations. Eye contact really is directly at the light, directly at that center, the center top of your computer in most cases. We did have a question come in specifically trying to get some advice about responding to to the lack of physical cues. So what are some tips that you have specifically around trying to read an audience when there are so few physical cues that you would pick up on in the room?
I think first and foremost is take your time, especially with virtual interviews. Talk slowly. Give yourself a pause before and after everything you say. Allow yourself to take that time to look at all of their faces on the screen and see what their facial reactions are. Especially because there's probably going to be a lag. So, whatever you say they're not going to hear that for another few seconds. So, give yourself that space and feel comfortable with it. And they'll probably do the same for you. And so, don't talk too fast, don't, speed through it and not take the time to look at them. They understand that you're in this situation, so they'll be very understanding for that.
What else? So I very often will say, and Kat, I think your points are great, like slow down, slow down, slow down. The fewer cues that you can actually have access to, and this goes for phone interviews, I think especially, the more likely you are to speed up. And I think speeding up, changing the volume of your voice, and going longer than you intend to are all of the consequences of an interview or presentation being mediated in a virtual space. When it comes to virtual presentations, a really easy way to get check-ins or get responses from the audience, which can be tough, is to actually ask for them. I don't know if anybody's been in a class so far where a professor has asked for everybody to put a smiley face emoji in the comments, or to do this, or to like wobble around to make sure that you're paying attention. But keeping, doing this inherently kind of sucks, right? We don't like being viewers in this space any more than we like being presenters and interviewers. So if you're presenting, especially, getting the audience to like put on a silly hat or like run around the room one time and getting them engaged somehow physically in a way that wouldn't actually even be available if you were in person can be a way to get physical cues and reactions. I mean, think about when you are trying to convey that you are understanding or paying attention to someone in a virtual space. I find myself nodding like this a lot more than I would if we were all in a room. So think about the things that you do virtually to communicate that you are engaged, and try to figure out how to elicit those same responses in the virtual space. I'll say one more thing about phone interviews that I wouldn't necessarily say about virtual interviews on Zoom, is that sometimes it can be really helpful in a phone interview to stand. Especially, like, this is something that we do with virtual interviews too that I talked about, is like hunching over the computer, but especially on the phone, if you go negative, if you start to feel bad in a phone interview, you're gonna start to kind of lean over like this. And by staying up and giving yourself either one hand, or if you have some sort of headphones you can use, two hands to gesture and move around, you're gonna have a little bit more energy. And that literally does translate into the way that you sound on the phone. A little bit more vibrant, a little more up. Anything else about kind of, artificially producing the opportunity to get some of these cues back from your audience or from an interviewer?
I think the nice thing about Zoom and like presentations is, well, one, making space, like it is, stopping if anyone has questions, but also like the chat function is great because nobody actually has to like interrupt you verbally, or the hand raise function. I know sometimes it can be hard to see those things while like screen sharing, which is why it's important to insert pauses throughout like a presentation, but those are like great ways in like which you can still interact with someone without necessarily having to have the visual social cues. So I think that's nifty.
That's great. And I kind of also want to address this question that came up about addressing interruptions, or addressing either technical glitches or other challenges that you might have to contend with in these virtual spaces or phone environments that you might not have to in person.
I think if you're in an interview setting, when in doubt, in terms of like times where you're interrupting one another, when in doubt, just stop talking and say, sorry, what was that? I didn't catch that. Or, give them the opportunity to finish their sentence, because in an interview setting, they want to see that you're polite, and they might be asking a follow-up question to what you're saying, so you might actually want to hear that before you continue talking. So when in doubt, just kind of pause and take a step back and say, sorry, what was that? I didn't catch that. And then they'll keep going, or they might even say, no, you continue, and you'll go on like that. And just like be comfortable with that, because you're in that situation, and it's totally fine.
Anything else, like tactics for trying to contend with disruptions that might be happening around you as you present or on an interview?
I think it's important just to let people know that they can stop you at any point. That's something I do in general because I know I talk fast, and like now on top of that, we're on Zoom. So letting people know, like, please feel free to stop me at any point. I've had times where like they freeze and I like must glitch up on them. So then I'll like stop and then wait and be like, I didn't catch what you were saying, or did you catch what I was saying? And repeating. I think that's important just to make sure like people feel comfortable, because I know it can be awkward. Like, hey, I didn't catch that. So just like trying to like make a space where it's okay, or like it at least, you know, like communicate that you feel like it's okay. So
Yeah, Daniela, I think that's great. Like setting, you know, this is actually something that you all might want to think about in terms of ground setting for a presentation or an interview. So before we begin, I want to set some, just say some things up front. I don't have a fantastic internet connection. So if I go out, it would be really helpful if you could chat to me that you can't hear me. I'm happy to repeat anything. Or if you say something like, hey, you know, I have family staying with me right now, and if the interruptions here get to be too much, I'm just going to put my hand up and let you know I'm going to transition to phone. But setting those expectations at the start of the conversation, it makes it so much easier to contend with if those circumstances actually end up happening during the interview or conversation. And I promise you again, like one thing that I've been repeating to lots of different student advisees these past few weeks is we are all in this situation together right now. And by setting those ground rules, by calling out the awkwardness, as Kat, you kind of keep referring back to, you are acknowledging almost a kind of solidarity, right? We are all in this together. You're reminding people of the awkwardness that everybody is contending with every day. It can become a kind of icebreaker thing to acknowledge. Yeah, any other thoughts on that? Or maybe kind of general, we're getting up towards, you know, the limit for attentiveness for these online conversations. So maybe we could do a quick lightning round. Like if we only had a 5-minute Zoom call and you could only provide one piece of advice to prepare for virtual interviews or presentations, what would that piece of advice be?
I would say charge your technology and have an extra pair of headphones nearby.
Is that because you saw me go off camera and get my charger for a second? Okay, I get it.
yeah, maybe on a similar vein, like set up your space beforehand, and it couldn't hurt to like have an extra set of notes on the side.
I would say practice using the virtual platform that you will be using, so that you know what you'll look like, what angle works, what lighting works, and like where you want your notes to be, and all of that. You can figure that out when you practice. But I think it can be overwhelming if you just start the Zoom interview without having practiced it before. So I would say that's my #1 piece of advice.
I think for me, because sometimes I feel the need to like act it up because I'm in front of a camera. I think that never works because then you're just not true to who you are when you bringing yourself to the table, even if it is a virtual platform, always is a way to do it because that's what you're comfortable doing and that's who you are. Like trying to play it up to the camera as if you're on like a YouTube channel or something, like, you know, like acting a part isn't gonna help necessarily, whether that be in person or on this virtual platform, but more so now more than ever, I think bringing yourself to the table and being comfortable with like doing whatever it is that, you know, emphasizes how you express yourself. I think that's just key. On top of everything with like setting up the space and lighting and all that fun stuff.
That could not be like I can't think of a more Barnard thing to end on than, you know, bring your whole dang self to an interview or presentation no matter what. And even in these flattened, stupid screens that we're living in these days, the force of your personality and your arguments and your intellect will definitely shine. So thank you for that, Hawa. Thank you for everybody's time this evening on our panel. Silent applause for everybody. Thanks to all of you for taking some time out on an afternoon to join us. This presentation has been recorded, and we are actually in the process of uploading a bunch of our recordings and panel discussions to the brand new Beyond Barnard YouTube channel. Guys, look out. It's a whole new virtual world at the whatever, Beyond Barnard. And Brianna is asking, can we do a group photo for social? So I need to make my gallery view even bigger. Brianna, if you are listening, I actually don't know the best way to do this. Is there like a...
I think it's where you see speaker view. You click that.
But that's just you, or that's just me now.
Oh, is it? I thought there would be
Hang on, I'm
Like,
gonna do,
they're out-
I'm gonna do 2 quick screenshots. Everybody smile. You can like literally hear my janky laptop take the picture. Okay, there's one, and we actually have 2 pages. So everybody smile again. 1, 2, 3, ah. Okay, awesome. Thank you, everybody. Have a good evening. We'll talk to you soon.
Bye.
Bye.